Good morning, everybody, afternoon, wherever you may be. Welcome to Think Northwest Now. I am Doug Zanger, Executive Director of Think Northwest. And a little bit of housekeeping here. I believe it was the philosopher Basho that once said, no, I don't know who it was, but I will say that people make mistakes. And I made a mistake as I was setting something up in the Eventbrite. So if you are clicking into the studio right now, I kindly ask that you go over to our LinkedIn Live page. And it's not you, it's me. It's not you, it's me. So we're going to get this thing kicked off. So again, if you manage to make your way into like the back end of this thing, please go on over to LinkedIn Live and let that be a lesson to everybody. Double check, triple check, quadruple check. So I think I missed somewhere along the line. But before we get started, I do want to play something to kick off our time together and our event and get us started. So we'll be right back after we show you this in a second. And but what I want to do is I want to go over a little bit of housekeeping before we discuss that. I agree. I think that, and I'll tell you why I think that's the most important commercial in the history of advertising here in a second. But a little bit of a few things, a little housekeeping. We have a Think Northwest Talent Talk, Navigating Economic Downturns. That's going to be with our friends 52 Limited. That's going to be on Tuesday, March 21st at 1 p.m. And then we're up in Seattle, and I'm going to bring my co-pilot in here in a second. We are starting with an extremely happy dog walk. Even if you have a dog, cool. If you don't have a dog, that's fine too. Just show up. We're going to meet in front of Mechanism at 1201 Western Avenue, and we're just going to walk around the area and go around Elliott Bay and just walk around. And then the extremely happy hour in Seattle, Thursday, March 23rd, also at Mechanism. We're very excited, and thank you to our partners at Mechanism. And wrapping up the month, Think Northwest Now. The title is So You Want to Get Coverage in Adweek. That's going to be with Adweek editor Kyle O'Brien. We're going to talk about building your earned media muscle. And joining me, our friend from Seattle, Tim. Scott, I'm going to hide you. I'm going to hide you right now. Hold on. I'm going to hide Scott for a second. So this is me working with StreamYard. There you go. Tim,
yes,
is the founder of TDW and Company. You founded the agency 18 years ago, and remarkable work that you do. You are worldwide, and I want to thank you for joining us. Now, here's the other thing: Tim played basketball at Pacific Lutheran University.
That's correct.
So we are doing something a little bit in his wheelhouse here. Now, Tim, I want to talk about that ad. So written by Janet Champ and a few others at Wyden. The spot aired in 1995. And I've had this discussion with a lot of people, and especially creative people. There is an argument that Apple 1984 was a seminal bit of work, and I'm not disputing that. Absolutely. And you can go through a long list of advertising, but I think that spot, when it ran in 1995, a couple of things here. Number one, for all you data folks, this is a data-centric ad because it's reeling off all of these statistics around the importance of play, and especially for girls. And the other thing is this ad spawned probably millions of imitators. So if you see any ad today that is working towards making a point in an emphatic way, it started here. No one had ever seen anything like this. And again, I think it's been imitated, but never perfected. I do honestly believe that this is one of the ads, and I say it is the ad that changed advertising. It's a pretty strong opinion, but there is an argument that this is one of the ads that changed advertising. What do you think?
Yeah, Doug, I mean, I appreciate you bringing this to light because there is a lot of, I think, trend on speaking about purposeful marketing and issues-based marketing and cause-oriented marketing. And I think, as brands begin to kind of imitate, as you mentioned, or adopt this philosophy of Nike back in the 90s, talking about inclusion of women in sports and having data to kind of surround that kind of message is it hasn't been on trend for Nike. This is something that they, what I believe they've believed in from day one. And so I think it's just really interesting just being able to take an example like that back in the 90s, where there are still a lot of companies and brands that are trying to adopt that kind of
Right.
way of marketing today. So,
And yep.
yeah.
And so, as I elegantly bring in our guest, Scott Reames, somebody needs a tutorial on StreamYard. Raising my hand, Scott. Thank you so much for joining us. So, Scott is the historian emeritus. I love a good emeritus title.
Okay,
Um,
I kind of made it up because it sounds better than retired, but yes.
yeah, we'll go with that. We'll go with that. Um, but Scott spent many years at Nike in various roles, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But let's start with this because, and I was talking to people about this is that Nike is a proudly Pacific Northwest brand. It is something that, especially in Oregon, but I would argue particularly in the Pacific Northwest, it has an interesting origin story. And Scott, you have your own Pacific Northwest origin story. So tell us a little bit about how you ended up in the Great Pacific Northwest.
Well, it's interesting because I'm a third generation, but I mean, my grandfather ground shoe company in St. Louis. So when my dad told us that we were moving to Eugene in 1976, he said it was to work for us. He was joining a small athletic footwear company in Eugene, and sadly, it was not Nike. It was a company called Osaga, and Osaga would probably be only known by my family, a handful of other people, and some really seriously running folks in the 70s. It lasted about 5 years. So my parents moved back to St. Louis. I ended up staying at going to the University of Oregon, kind of falling in love with the Northwest, and then graduated from U of O. Worked for a PR agency for a couple of years, then for a small event company, and then in 1992, Nike Town, Portland, and Chicago, they were looking for an events and marketing and PR coordinator
Right.
to do the athlete events. They were brand new at that time. We had just opened Chicago in July of '92. So Nike folks were bringing athletes in all the time, and they needed somebody to coordinate them and run them. So that was my role. I was the only person of all the people who applied who had demonstrable experience in PR, marketing, and events. So I had that lucky combination.
Oh,
That's what got my foot in the door.
those were the go-go days. Just
Yeah.
as a little bit of my own background, I worked at Nike Town in Portland from '96 to like 2.5 years, '96 to '98, and yeah, I loved it. I mean, I absolutely loved it. And it's interesting. There are things that I learned back then that I still pull from today, and it's about curiosity and being, I was a product specialist, and so when something new would come out, I would work with uh, factory store managers. They would come into town, and I loved it. I loved every second of it. And again, like I said, there's still some things that I lean on from even that far back, but a lot of it comes down to the education and having that curiosity to be part of it. And you got there. You mentioned that you got there at a very interesting point in its history, and tell us when you became Nike's historian, because you took this pathway forward, and probably unbeknownst to you, you were dropping the seeds for all of this.
Well, it was a progression. That's absolutely right. So I work with all these athlete and sports marketing people to bring athletes into the store. So I get to know the sports marketing people, and as I get to know the sports marketing people, I identified a couple of what I thought were inefficiencies. Let's put it that way. In procuring athletes to come into the stores, it was very siloed, right? So if I need an athlete in Chicago, Nike Town, Chicago, I had to go to Nike Basketball to try to get a Bull, and if I couldn't get, and if none of the Bulls are available, then I had to start all over again with baseball, trying to get a White Sox or a Cub. If I couldn't get one of them, I had to start all over again with a Bear. And I thought, this is just silly. There should be one central area where you just say, I need an athlete, and then a sports marketing group comes back and says, we've got X or Y who can do it on such and such a day. So that's basically what I proposed. And within a few weeks or a few months, I guess, I was the one doing that. So be careful what you suggest.
Be careful what you ask for.
So I did that for 2.5, 3 years. And then during that, I worked with the Atlanta Olympics and did a lot of other Nike Town openings and got to know a lot of the people in the public relations department, because, of course, they would publicize the athletes that were doing these events. And PR is actually my background. I had a journalism degree from the University of Oregon. and I really wanted to be in public relations, but it just didn't. It wasn't how I could access the company back in '92. Basically, it was back then. If you got in, you got in. And you were just happy to be in. But by '97, I got to know enough people that Lee Weinstein, I believe you might have met him.
Yeah.
He hired me to come, or actually asked me to move over to the PR department. So I did that for the next 5.5, 6 years. And then while doing that, I got to know Phil Knight and Mark Parker and some of the other senior leaders. And while I was facilitating their interviews and listening in or helping with the fact checking on interviews, I just couldn't help notice that every time they would tell or talk about Nike history, it was a little different, right? From, we paid $35 for the swoosh. We paid $50 for the swoosh. We paid $75 for the swoosh. And I thought, okay, it's got to be one of those, doesn't it? And I realized that we had a lot of oral history and a lot of people who knew a lot about our history, but it was not really written down other than a couple of attempts at books that were written. But even those were written back in the 80s and early 90s. So it was definitely, I thought, a real, not really, not a threat, but it would be a major loss to lose any of those people. And then that started happening with Bill Bowerman's death in 1999. Rob Strasser, a very important person in the 1980s for Nike, died in 1993 or 3, I think, or 4. So mortality was becoming more and more of a real thing. And so I basically put together a pitch, suggested that we already had an archive which was full of great things, but the stories behind them were a little sketchy, inconsistent, sometimes even disagreed with each other. I mean, so there was no real. I didn't really have any real faith that what the stories we had were 100% accurate. So the proposal was that we take the archives department, ramp it up into what became the Department of Nike Archives, or AKA DNA, and the pivotal role there would be to have an historian to make sure that the stories behind the products are captured, accurate, expanded. Look for other opportunities, other people to interview, other voices to add to the choir, and that's what I did from about late 2004 until I retired in 2021.
Well, and that's your journalism background right there. I mean, the fact checking and all of that, because you are a journalist. Like, I know that you are a journalist, and that's very important to you is having that accuracy.
Well, it's for knowing what a story is, knowing what it isn't, knowing how to pull it out of people, right? How to interview, and then knowing how to take all those pieces and weave it into something that's interesting to read. I mean, fortunately for Nike, or for me, Nike's a fascinating company with incredible amounts of them. You got athletes, you got controversy, you got successes, you got failures. I mean, there's a lot to cover. So being a good writer certainly helps, but there was a lot of amazing material to draw from. And then over time, I was fortunate that the work I was doing was valued enough that I was allowed to hire additional people, because one person covering a company of Nike's size around the globe was a bit of a challenge. And when I retired, and they currently now have 7 people divided over different parts of the company to specialize in different parts, because it would literally be impossible to be an expert on everything Nike's ever done. I did my best, but it was hard.
Oh yeah, no, I can imagine. Tim, I'm going to ask one quick question, and then I'd like you to ask yours real quick. So we're going to bounce around a little bit here, Scott, but I want to talk about brand history because it is a very fascinating field. I remember that I interviewed when I forget which publication I was at, spoken like a true journalist. I interviewed the historian at Coca-Cola, and it really is a fascinating field, because what you're talking about here is, a lot of brands have these rich histories. So some obviously are more famous than others, but that doesn't mitigate the impact of the importance of a company or a brand's history. So I'm curious, how, if you collaborated with some of the other brand historians, how you collaborated with them, what you learned from them,
Sure.
and maybe what they learned from you.
Was that Phil Mooney you spoke to at Coke?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
He's considered by a lot of us in this industry somewhat the godfather of business archives. And it's funny, you should have literally, of all the things for people you'd pick out, he was literally the first person I went to, because you would want to go to the Godfather first. So in 2004 and early 5 was when I was assuming the role, and I knew Nike but I didn't really know archiving. And we had an archive department, and there were a lot of great people in there, but they were somewhat, I thought, insulated or insular. And I kept thinking there's got to be best practices. There's got to be things that other brands are doing. And it turned out I was right. And these people were amazingly welcoming and happy to show us their inner workings. And one of the first things we did was we flew to Atlanta and we met with Phil. And I mean, he couldn't have been more accommodating. And at that time, they were just preparing. I think they were a few months away from opening the World of Coke, a major consumer-facing experience. And he was telling us the whole strategy behind it, and what they were doing, and why they were doing, what the stories they were going to tell, and how they were connected to marketing, and how they weren't connected to marketing. I mean, it was fascinating. And then he opened the door for us to go to Harley Davidson, and Anheuser-Busch, Levi Strauss. I mean, we met with a number of different brands. Either we wanted some that were similar to Nike, but also maybe some that were a little different, just so we could get a broader understanding. And the information, I mean, my heart was pounding flying back from Atlanta, because I just felt like, oh my God, we could do this and we could do that. And it was truly put us ahead years of where we would have done if we'd stumbled trying to do it ourselves.
I mean, I can imagine just going into that history. I mean, it probably sparked so many great ideas and so many great things. Speaking of history, Tim, go ahead, and we'll call that a professional broadcast segue. Tim, go ahead and ask your question. You had a couple of questions that you wanted to throw out there. Yeah.
I mean, I think in the context of the Think Northwest community, a lot of creative professionals and advertising professionals that adore Nike's history of making beautiful commercials, the art of the storytelling, and the emotional impacts that Nike has made on so many people through its work. And, we just saw that If You Let Me Play spot with women inclusion, but also I think getting a pulse on what's going on in society at that moment. So there's, Charles Barkley's like, I'm not your role model spot, and more recently, I know there's been a lot of attention towards Colin Kaepernick's believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything. And also, for once, don't do it, right? Really to combat racism. So I guess in your mind, understanding the history, I think, of the culture and the creative firepower, I think, within Nike, and just being able to get a pulse on the sense of community. What do you believe has really kind of been Nike's success, its secrets to success, and being able to talk about these difficult topics, but then bringing them to the world for us to see?
Well, it's a far-ranging question, which I'll do my best to answer.
Sorry, I'm not a professional journalist.
As opposed to, like, what do you like better, green or yellow? So this one, I thought I'd get this asked occasionally in different forms. And part of it, I think, is Nike has, with occasional lapses, has been pretty true and understands who it is, or who they are, and who their consumer is, and who their target, who they're talking to. So again, with occasional flubs, because nobody's perfect, we're pretty good. I'm sorry, I keep going back between we and they. I'll probably do that for the rest of my life, but we're pretty good at knowing how to talk to and how to communicate with our core consumers. And I think the Kaepernick ad is a great example of that. I mean, it was very polarizing to a certain extent, but it was mostly polarizing in that it angered more conservative, older, I don't even go into the color of their skin, but more basically angry white men. We're burning our shoes, and we're really upset with the ad, and didn't particularly care for Nike, and they're making their voices known. Who loved the ad, and who it really hit and scored with, was 16, 20, 22-year-old younger people, and they were absolutely thrilled that a brand was making a statement in support of what I clearly was something that they also shared. So it's certainly risky, because we knew that there would be people that would not be happy. But I think because we knew our audience, we knew who we wanted to reach, that there was an acceptance that there would be any collateral damage would be acceptable, because it would not be among the people who we really wanted to share and understand who we are. So I think that has gone on. I mean, If You Let Me Play wasn't don't know if it's controversial. I think it shocked a few people. I mean, it's still to this day, it's jarring to me having, I don't know, girls, but I have small boys, to hear a young girl say, "I'll be more likely to leave a man who beats me." I mean, you just look at that girl and go, "Well, no one's going to beat you, honey. I mean, just you'll be okay." That's not true. The girls are abused, and so things like that. It was, I was only with Nike for 3 years at that point, but when that ad came out, I remember thinking, wow. I mean, that was so different. And then right on the heels of that was HIV Runner with Rick Munoz, right? So that was all part of a Just Do It campaign that was that year, and you got a man running through the woods, and he's all these accomplishments, how many marathons he runs, how many miles he runs, and the next thing it just says HIV positive or HIV runner or HIV positive. And then it just goes to Just Do It, and he keeps running, and you're like, did I just see that? And so again, this is back in '95 when HIV and AIDS were, it was just a very different atmosphere than it is now. So those two ads, I think, especially, and certainly so early in my career, really showed me that this is a company that's not going to just do toothpaste and the kind of the, oh, my husband's such an idiot, everyone.
Oh, I think did we lose him? Did we lose him?
Just kind of blinked out for a second.
No, it's okay.
Hello?
I have that effect on a lot of people. I mean, you've touched on some eras. I mean, what are some other eras that you think were really defining?
Within marketing, or just for Nike in general?
Just probably for the brand. Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, I was there. I researched the '70s and '80s, but from personal experience, I can tell you the '90s were very much a growth. I mean, literally a growth. I mean, we went from $3 billion and change in revenue in the early '90s to about $9 billion within 7 years. That's insane, right? There was one time in less than 365-day period where the stock split twice. And I remember at that time thinking, I'm going to retire before I'm 40, man. I'm just getting wealthy on all these, the 100 shares of stock I have. But it was not sustainable, as it turned out. But I mean, the '90s were about, we were signing deals with federations like the Brazilian football team, the U.S. and women's and men's soccer team, the U.S. track and field team. We had partial deals with the NFL. We were supporting the the AB. I think it was what was the name of the other league? There was another women's league besides the WNBA. They didn't last very long, but we supported them. Anyway, it was just one thing after another in the '90s, and at the same time, we were growing internationally. So we're getting a lot more business internationally. We're getting a lot more athletes, and just the scope of what we were doing was just broader and larger on every front. And it was tremendous, but it was also exhausting because you always felt like you had to have your A game because we were, somebody else was going to come in and swoop in. If you couldn't, kill it, then somebody else would do it. So there was a lot of late nights, hard work, and a lot of ideation too. There's also a lot of ability to come up with sometimes even crazy ideas, and people would be like, "Well, sounds good to us. Let's try it," And the '96 Olympics were a great example there, where the game plan for what we had worked on leading up to Atlanta was followed to a certain extent, but there were a number of opportunities that came up at the last minute, and people were like, "Shoot, go for it!" And so we were doing things that were not on the plan. And I don't know if a lot of companies do that. I haven't worked for a lot of other major Fortune 500 companies, but it was pretty amazing how much we would be willing to zig and zag if there was a perceived opportunity, even if it was not part of the larger plan.
Yeah, no, I like that. And of course, we all remember Michael Johnson's shoes, the gold shoes. Yes. Those were phenomenal.
That was spikes. Good. No pressure there, Michael. You're wearing gold shoes, so guess what?
It was in the bag.
You finished second or third, you're going to get ripped. And this is before social media. Can you imagine?
In the bag.
Social media.
Yep.
But even that's a great story that was the only reason that shoe came about was because we failed an athlete 3 years earlier in Stuttgart with Quincy Watts. His shoe had delaminated at the World Championship Games in Stuttgart and was flopping on, the glue, the upper had fallen apart from the outsole, and he was not able to finish the race. It basically cost him a gold. And it was such an embarrassing and terrible thing, as Phil Knight has said, that to fail an athlete at the highest level the whole footwear organization for the highest elite athletes was reorganized, and out of that, 3 years later, came the gold shoes. So that's actually you hit on. It's one of my favorite stories. It was one of my favorite stories to tell because it's an example. It lasts over time, right? You need to test things. You need to be careful. You need to plan properly. That can apply to a pair of shoes in 1996 or something you're working on for 2024. And that was one thing that we do try to do in DNA is make sure we're not just telling old grandpa stories. Like, oh, when I was a kid, Hershey bars were only 40 cents. Like, great, grandpa, super. They're not now. So we tried really hard to make sure that the stories we find are relevant today, but drawn from our past.
Yeah, I love it. Tim, you had another question you wanted to ask real quick.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting to see just the massive expansion and how the global economy also kind of helped to fuel a lot of the rapid expansion that you had just described. I think honing in on to maybe specifically in the Pacific Northwest, and obviously being headquartered, Nike being headquartered in Beaverton and in the PNW. Want to talk a little bit about maybe the Pacific Northwest's influence, or Oregon in particular, for Nike along the way as it started its process of evolution and has made it into what it's become today. So maybe if you could speak a little bit about that and its history.
Sure. Well, again, going way back, Bill Bowerman, Phil Knight, both native Oregonians, and then if you want to call it the third leg of the triangle, Steve Prefontaine, the first really. I mean, we had one or other athlete signed before Pre, but he's considered the soul of Nike, also a native-born Oregonian. So you have that connectivity. Bill Bowerman was quoted, or has been famously quoted, as saying about the Oregon Trail that those who started out, if you, okay, I got to get this right. He goes, the weak never started. No, the cowards. I'm sorry, this is so bad. I'm getting out of practice. The cowards never started, and the weak died along the way. So essentially, he's saying is the people who survived, or first who went on the Oregon Trail to move to the Northwest and then survived it, are the strongest willed and the ones with the greatest, essentially almost Darwin in action on the way. And that, I think, has permeated the culture to a certain extent. There's a lot of people within the company that have a very much of a rebel, a cause. I mean, they're out to prove things. They're out to really become. I don't know. This is a tough one because it's. I mean, you're talking about thousands of people over time. Started with those three essentially, and others who followed soon after. But the fact that it still endures. I certainly think of Wyden Kennedy being based in Portland, and Dan being from the University of Oregon. There's a lot of that shared experience. I mean, we pump our own gas here. I mean, nobody pumps their own gas. Nobody wants to. I mean, we don't have a sales tax, and people here are absolutely proud of the fact that 48 other states or 49 don't do this, but we do. And it's just I don't know if that even makes sense, but it just to me is like a microcosm of Oregonians loving to be different, and Nike loves to be different and loves to be who they are. I mean, they love to be very strong and very forthright and powerful, and they know what they want and they go for it. And I think that's somewhat of the pioneer spirit, if you will.
Mm. Well, they have that saying, keep Portland weird, right? And I think that kind of...
Oh, you invoked keep Portland weird.
I'm sorry.
Boy.
Should I not have said that? I'm just coming. Sorry. I just came from South by, and there's that saying in Austin, but then at the same time, I'm kind of like, I love the creative energy, the artist spirit. Man,
I don't
man, why are you giving me a hard time, man? I'm just trying to
I'm teasing you, man. I'm
figure out what is the recipe for making all this creative juice and vibe kind of come.
Well, look at even our NBA team, the Trail Blazers, right? I mean, this is a very strong thread in the Northwest, especially if you've got a lot of folks from Think Northwest. They know this area, they know Seattle, Washington, and this is a very common theme. I mean, people are independent. People wish to assert their ideas. I mean, just the time that we lived in Eugene, I was like amazed at how much everything got talked about, no matter whether it was I mean, everything, everything was discussed almost to the nth degree. And it's like, gosh, we got a lot of people weighing in on their opinion, but they're passionate about it, right? They don't want to just have a new intersection going without explaining why it is or is not a good idea. And same with our footwear and our designs and our growth with the company. There are a lot of people who are very passionate. Sometimes that gets almost to the point of you guys need to settle down because we have to make a decision and move forward. But a lot of times, as like I was saying with Atlanta, having those people willing to step up and at the last minute say, I think this is a better idea. And not everybody goes, well, Johnson, we already figured we're going to do it this way. And they're like, well, tell me more. And then having the balls to do it if they really do feel it's a better idea.
Yeah. Well, Tim, you who pump your own gas, which I enjoyed being in Seattle yesterday, by the way. Yeah, you can tell the Oregonian in Washington, I think I did it right. Did I just splash gas all over me? But Tim, it's a good point, and Scott brings up a lot of really good points here. I would argue also that, and Tim, you and I have talked about this a lot. If you think about the Pacific Northwest in general, Starbucks was rebellious in a way. You could argue Microsoft. You could argue like these are like bold stories. Not saying that brands from other places are not like that, but there's something intrinsically unique about this part of the world that feels very zag and less zig. I think that's how I see it for sure. And yeah, I mean, I think that I think there is this frontier mentality of trying to do things in a way that stand out but are unique and memorable.
I mean, yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, it's interesting you talk about a lot of the major corporate entities that have been started and founded and are here in the Pacific Northwest and in Seattle. I mean, you name Amazon, Microsoft, Starbucks, you have Nordstrom, T-Mobile, Expedia, so many different companies from so many different verticals and fields. And of course, very early on, it was Boeing in the aerospace, Costco. I mean, we can go on and on
right.
and on and on. But I believe that absolutely in the Pacific Northwest, there's this mentality of innovation, of going into the new frontier and creating something that had never existed before, disrupting what an industry might look like and making a business for itself and for the world around us, and attracting talent from all over the world to be here in the Pacific Northwest, I think is kind of an interesting trait that we have here in the PNW. So we're really proud of that.
Yep. So there's our pitch to all of you not in the Pacific Northwest watching today. But in all honesty, seriously, I'll just say, if you are outside of the market and you want to be part of our vibe, reach out to me, Zanger.
Come on over.
Zanger at ThinkNW.org. Make you a little deal. Become part of the family. Scott, let's play fact or fiction. You have some fact or fiction for us, correct? Because there's any brand, anything. We like trivia, first of all. We like trivia a lot. So Scott, you got to hit us with some fact or fiction here.
All right. Well, this is probably one of my. I won't say that because it'll give it away. Now you have a picture here, right? The shape of the swoosh was inspired by the wing of the Greek goddess Nike. Is that fact or fiction?
I already know this one, so I'm going to let Tim answer this one.
Oh man, fact.
Ooh.
Sorry. You get to go.
Why are you guys making me? Oh, so I'm a Nike brand ambassador through and through. It's just the history of Nike I need to work on. So that's
okay. That's good. You're learning.
That's where I'm learning. Okay.
Yeah.
It is fiction, and it's one of those things that it seems really plausible because the group does look like a wing, and Nike is named the Greek goddess of victory. However, the swoosh came first. Carolyn Davidson was asked to come up with a design for the Blue Ribbon Sports, which is the precursor to Nike. And she came up with the design, and then the shoe that was going to carry that swoosh on it needed a name, and the name was Nike. So it would have been impossible for her to be inspired by something that had not yet been named. But if you go on the internet right now, I can guarantee you the first 8 of the first 12 websites you go on, they're going to have some version of it was inspired by this.
Okay.
The name Nike in it.
And Tim, bonus point for you. Carolyn Davidson went to which Pacific Northwest college?
Pacific Lutheran University?
Yep. She went to Portland State University.
Oh, man.
You got the university and you got it started with a P. So you had it. You're in the ballpark. So
oh my gosh. Okay. That's good. Okay. I will get one. I will get one.
Okay. All right. Well, let's see. Scott, your second question.
Maybe not. I don't know.
Second fact or fiction.
Okay. The second fact or fiction. Nike went public on December 2nd, 1980. An opening stock price of $22 per share. If you had bought 100 shares of Nike stock for $2,200, you would now have, and never sold them, you would now have $1.5 million. Is that fact or fiction?
It's math.
Dude, yeah, sorry.
Should we flip a coin? Let me find a coin. I'm going to say fact. Let's say fact. Tim, are we good with fact?
Dude, yeah, I'm with you on this one, man.
Okay.
It is indeed a fact. The stock is what,
gold thing was good.
Yep.
If you bought those 100 shares in 1980 and never sold them, they would have split 7 times. You'd now be the proud owner of 12,800 shares of Nike stock, and it's trading at about $118 today. So that's a cool 1.5 mil.
You have one more? You got one more? Fact or fiction?
Yeah, I give you one more.
Yeah.
Oh, Phil Knight made up the name Blue Ribbon Sports because that was his favorite beer.
Pabst Blue Ribbon was his favorite beer, so that's how the original name.
Oh, sorry.
All right, Tim.
I'm going to say false on this one.
I'm going to say fiction as well.
Or fiction. Sorry. False.
And I think Scott's
well
frozen.
Done,
oh, no, there he is. Okay. Oh, he's just staring at us.
No, you are absolutely correct. It is fiction. Phil Knight is teased, and a lot of his friends say that's why it was Pabst Blue Ribbon was the inspiration, but it was actually Phil had to come up with a name on the spot because he's basically BSing his way in a meeting in Tokyo, or in Kobe, Japan, talking about being an importer of footwear, which he wasn't. And he asked the name of his company, and he said Blue Ribbon Sports. And the result of the reason for that was he was a runner, and in high school and in junior high, if you did well, you got a blue ribbon. So he thought it was a connotation of success or winning. But his friends teased him mercilessly. They're like, "Not your favorite beer." So that's why I give people more credit when they get that one wrong, because there have been people who said that jokingly.
Right.
Those are just 3 tiny microcosms of some of the things I have had to deal with over the past 17 years, and some of them are big, where you really have to go, no, that didn't happen.
I love it.
The inflated story, like the book. I often equate it to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street, the Dr. Seuss book.
Oh God, that's a deep cut. Yeah.
It's basically a man walking his horse. And the kid or whoever's watching it is, by the end of the book, has inflated it into like a gigantic parade and amazing things. And it's because every time he retells the story, he wants to make it a little more interesting. That's how the fish keeps getting larger. The one that got away, it was 4 inches, 12 inches, it was 1.5 feet. And this thing, the same was true with Nike. As people tell this, and they add this, they embellish that, and pretty soon the original is long forgotten. So that was one of the biggest challenges I had in the earliest days, was trying to understand what was fact and what was fiction. And there are still people to this day, when I tell them a certain thing did or didn't happen, they get like, no, that's not, I've heard that, that's not how it happened. I'm like, yes, it is how it happened. And I can even show them the forensics, and they just kind of shrug their head and go, or shrug their shoulders and say, well, that's not the way I heard it. That might be the name of my book. That's not the way
I heard it. Yeah, or that could be an off-Broadway show. I think that's yeah. I mean, like off, like Jersey, like Jersey, like in Jersey.
Like Jersey.
Right. No, that's good. I love it. Oh, I do want to see if anyone can see this. So we were doing this earlier. Let's see if this works. Can you see? Oh, there it is. These are my dress shoes that I got in 2008. Oh. Okay, you can see that the outsole is really worn. So I did a little updating. Nike by You is one of the greatest inventions ever. So here's the updated version of that. So there we go. Those are my new formal shoes. Tim, where are your formal shoes?
My formal shoes are here. The the 321s.
Yep.
Yep. And this is what I like to sport with my, I guess, PNW business casual attire.
Yeah.
With
No, it's formal wear.
Oh, formal wear. I mean,
Oh yeah,
formal
that's
wear.
formal.
Yeah, this is totally formal, right? This isn't business casual. This is formal. You know?
Yeah.
Going to prom with these things.
Oh, I had the original Air Jordans wearing a tuxedo in New Jersey with a mullet. Well, I think it was a mullet. I don't know what it was, quite frankly. It was the 80s. Chances are it was a mullet. Yeah.
Oh, Scott.
You're showing the if you let me play it, reminded me. I've got these.
Oh, you've got the Oprah
Oh,
shoes.
sweet.
Oh, look at that.
These were handed out to the audience that day, and Phil was there. The lunar glides, and I don't wear them because, of course, you know, someday I'll need it for my grandchildren for their retirement fund. But I did get a pair, so that was exciting.
That's amazing. That is amazing. Well, Scott, thank you so much for joining us. Tim, thank you for joining us. And to all of you out there, Tim and Scott, if you could hang out just for 1 second. To all of you out there, I want to thank you all for joining us. And again, we have a lot of stuff going on, so please go to ThinkNW.org. We have more stuff coming up here on LinkedIn Live. We have more things happening in person again next week in Seattle. It's our extremely happy dog walk, and that is sponsored by Portland Pet Food Company. There may be samples. If you don't have a dog, that's fine. I'm bringing my dog, and you can hang out with us, and we're just going to walk on the waterfront, Elliott Bay, have a nice little time outside. And then on that Thursday next week, we have the extremely happy hour happening at Mechanism. On behalf of the board and everybody at Think Northwest, I want to thank you all for joining us. And as always, you can get in touch with us. Just go to thinknw.org. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.